Good morning, everyone. I'd like to echo my fellow speakers and to say that I'm really excited to be here this morning. One of the things that I remember from when I was at university was that we really had no careers advice at all. And when I started my job, I had absolutely no idea that environmental consulting even existed. So it's really good to get the opportunity to come back now and tell you guys about some of the opportunities that are available to you. So I'm going to start off by just going through my career path, which is slightly different from what we've heard about this morning. I might challenge some of the things that some of the other people have said. And then I'm going to talk to you about some of the employment opportunities in the consulting sector, some of the working practices that you may come across, which I think are very similar to some of the things we've heard this morning. Some skills that I think are generally beneficial, and then just talk about some of the development opportunities that exist. So we've heard this morning about how people's childhoods inspired them to get into ecology, and I'm going to start from my degree. It was really nice to hear that I spy books figuring this morning, and rock falling and poetry books as well, because all of that were things that inspired me. Probably David Attenborough should probably figure in there as well, I think. So I did my degree in marine biology at the University of Plymouth anyway. And as part of that degree, we were really lucky. We were able to do some commercial diving as part of our degree. And that meant that I could work as a voluntary diver at the National Marine Quarry, which was great fun. Even cleaning the glass, quite James Bond and stuff. And then I also, in the summers, used to work out in Tenerife doing some marine habitat surveys, again, diving. So this was all great stuff. All the time I was at university, everyone that I knew told me I'd never get a job in marine biology. And in fact, quite a lot of the people that were doing the degree with me didn't even want to do a job in marine biology. They were just doing it because it was something that was quite interesting. But I was quite determined, and I do agree with the previous speakers, that's really important. If you want a career, really go for it, because all the people I know that were really passionate about marine biology are now working in marine biology. So I was quite lucky. I finished my degree and went straight into a job with marine ecological surveys. And my first week of work, I really thought I'd hit the jackpot. I went from being a poor student living off baked beans on toast to being put up in nice hotels and having my dinner in restaurants paid for, which I thought was great. And even better than that, I was taken out to the Thames estuary. I think we used to start work about midnight. We used to climb into a small boat about the size of a bathtub, chug out to a fishing boat, and then go and collect a load of mud, which I just thought was absolutely brilliant. And then once we finished collecting mud, we then collected fish. So that was my first kind of fortnight of work, which was really brilliant fun. Although a lot of my friends really did like completely lost the plot at that point. So once we got all of our samples, we then went back to the lab. And then this is where I learned marine taxonomy and had to develop a love for worms. For weeks, this is what I dreamt of. This was all I could see when I closed my eyes. And I never thought I was going to get to the bottom of it. But eventually I could see that actually in months of that mess, there was quite a lot of biodiversity, and they did all look quite good. So that was quite a challenge. And one thing I think you do need to be prepared for going into a career in ecology is that you are going to have to do some fairly repetitive tasks. And they can be really tedious, and there are times where you just wonder why on earth you're doing it. We used to spend days on end blocked waiting worms for other people. That's fairly tedious, even just picking through these samples to pull out the worms. And there'll be things like data entry, that kind of thing as well. So there will be lots of tasks that can be quite boring and tedious, but if you stick with it, there's plenty of good stuff to come. And having that mix of field work and lab work, I think, was really a brilliant foundation for me. It meant that just naturally, without really putting any effort into it, you start making links. So this is an amphipod crustacean, and this is the habitat that lives in. So these are tube beds. And just by doing both of those tasks at the same time, you really get a good feel of where things are naturally occurring, who they naturally occur with, what they're eating, all those sorts of things. So this is where the curiosity comes in as well. And I think this is a really important foundation for pretty much any career in ecology. So then we move on from analysing the samples, making those links, doing a bit of data analysis and report writing. And you'll have touched on bits of this at university. but it's on a whole other scale once you start working. And certainly IT skills, I can't imagine anyone comes out of university without IT skills these days, but you'll learn a whole raft of IT skills once you start working. So after about 3 or 4 years with the company, Marine Ecological Surveys was a very small company when I started working there. There was 4 people working there when I started, and 2 of us started together, making 6. So that was quite an advantage, I think, because you can move up the company quite quickly, and I had lots of opportunities to get involved in all the different aspects of the business. My little curiosity and probably my tenacity as well meant that I kind of went more into a slightly research direction, which a lot of people don't think is possible within consultancy. But certainly within Marine Ecological Surveys, probably about half of our work is applied research. And the great advantage of doing research within a consultancy is it tends to be applied very quickly. So I'm just writing up my PhD at the moment, which I've been doing on an incredibly part-time basis. Already the research I've done in that has changed the way that marine surveys are carried out, and it's changed the way that the statutory nature conservation bodies treat Sabellaria when they find it, which is the subject of my PhD. And that's really satisfying. So you get quite quick returns. So I've just put a couple of slides up to show you some of the sorts of projects that I'm involved in. The last 5 or 6 years of my life have been taken up with the regional environmental characterisation surveys, which are huge surveys covering areas of kind of 5 to 11,000 square kilometres of the seabed, where we've gone out and we've collected geophysical information, biological information, put that all together, archaeological information as well, put that all together to come up with characterisation. And the point of these surveys was to put very localised impact assessments into a broader context. So that was a really exciting, probably about 6 pieces of work in total, but, and it meant I got to work with a really multidisciplinary team. That was really interesting. So other sorts of mapping that we get involved in quite routinely is habitat suitability modelling, which is essentially where we look at the environments that you usually find things and then extrapolate that information to create maps of where things are likely to occur. And also biotope classification schemes. I'm not sure how much you will have come across this kind of thing in your degree so far, but certainly in the marine world this is a really big deal. So people are always trying to partition the seabed and classify it in different ways. So we do a lot of work with that and try and improve the schemes that we're working with. Another area of my research has been on the impact of anthropogenic activities. So I've focused a lot of my work has been aggregate extraction. That used to be one of the main destructive activities that occurred in the sea. More recently, we're obviously moving on to the impacts of wind farms, wave farms, tidal farms, all those kinds of things. I'm not just looking at the direct impacts on the benthos, that's probably where I started. And again, the curiosity thing, whilst I'm out on the boat taking my grab samples and looking at my trawls, I do occasionally look inside the odd dead fish and see what they're eating. And then, collect those observations, and then we can start looking to see actually, yes, we can measure an impact, but what's the point of that impact? Is it significant? Is it something we need to be worried about? And so that's another big area of my research. So I've kind of carried on doing that for 5 or 6 years, based in Bath, which is probably one of the most landlocked places for marine biologists to be. In the middle of that section, Gardline brought out Marine Ecological Surveys. It's also grown a lot in that time. I think it's about 30 of them down there now. And I was given the opportunity to build a whole new business up in Scotland. So I think a few people mentioned this morning that you can't always predict where your career will go, and certainly I could never have predicted mine. So I've been up in Scotland for about 1.5 years now. What I'm doing there is, Gardline is a really large group. I think we employ about 2,000 people in the UK. And it's all based around marine surveys, so not just ecology, but also geotechnical surveys, geophysical surveys, all sorts of things, met-ocean surveys. So I'm up in Scotland developing contacts for all of those businesses and looking for business opportunities for those companies. So obviously I've had to recruit and train new staff and do market research, so a whole raft of things that I never really thought I would end up doing, and certainly management was never something I wanted to get into either. I think along the way you kind of find out your you're better at certain things than others, and your career will take you in a certain path. But I am still hanging on to my research, and that's kind of taken a slightly different direction because of changes in policy and legislation for the work that David's doing. And now what we're focusing on really is marine planning, and that's with the introduction of the Marine Coastal Act. So we're looking at things at the moment like how we might map the development potential for aquaculture. Integrated fisheries management is a big thing at the moment, so there's a big push for fisheries to become more sustainable, and particularly the inshore fleet are really keen for their fisheries to be more sustainable. So I do a lot of work with the inshore fisheries industry to try and improve their fisheries. Biodiversity offsetting is a new one, so there's kind of a move now for developers, obviously through the environmental impact assessment hierarchy. They shouldn't be having a huge impact, but there will always be a residual impact on biodiversity. So we look at the site and we say, well, there aren't any particularly sensitive habitats here, so we'll let you build your wind farm. But obviously, where every turbine is, you've taken away a piece of habitat. So within those areas, you are taking away some biodiversity. So what we've been looking at recently is ways that we might offset those kind of residual losses. And that might be things like reseeding of oyster beds or artificial reefs. There's lots of options for that. And then the other thing is with the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, so again another piece of legislation that we're having to work with. We're now looking at indicators of biodiversity. So it's quite nice because it kind of brings together all of my experience. So what I have and what's unique, the thing that I perhaps bring to the party in this is that I've been out on the surveys, I know what is practically doable. I understand how these things interact with each other, so what it's important to measure. And so it's now bringing all that together to come up with a sensible model. And that's kind of what my job's all about. So to give you a slightly broader view of environmental consulting then, and this is just my perspective on it, but generally it's kind of split up into two halves really. You have contracting and consulting. And often the words are used to mean the same thing. The consulting end really is giving advice and providing evidence. So it's much more of a thinking job. Contracting is maybe if somebody knows they need a particular survey, I need you to go out and do it. I probably always do a little bit of a mix of both, but there is potential for you to have just a career in one or just a career in others. So within the environmental consulting, and it's the same, a lot of this applies for the terrestrial environment as well. Environmental impact assessments play obviously a big role. Within that there's also regional environmental assessments and strategic environmental assessments. Habitat regulations assessments, going again back to the policy, looking to see how our activities interact with conservation areas, giving advice to regulators, spatial planning and further research. All these things kind of come together, helping us to be more sustainable in our use of the marine environment. And then within environmental contracting, you could be a field ecologist. There's a huge amount of jobs in this area, and that can be, there's a huge variation in what field ecologists might do. This is just in the marine. You could be a marine mammal observer, a PAMS operator, which is listening for cetacean noises, ornithological surveys or benthic ecology surveys. Obviously there's a whole raft of equivalents on land as well. Commercial taxonomy, that's a huge area of growth. So if you like working at a microscope, you certainly won't be out of the job if you go down that route. There's a massive shortage. NERC did a review quite recently on skills shortages, and taxonomy was way up there. And fisheries sustainability accreditation. So again, going back to making fisheries more sustainable. In terms of working practices, I don't think I'll be saying anything very different from what we've heard already this morning. Certainly consulting is generally office-based, and it is generally a 9-to-5 job. But there's also a lot of travel involved. Certainly in my early years I was away from home a lot on surveys. You might be away for a month on a survey, you might be away for a week. I also travel a lot in conferences, which can be a good and a bad thing. I've been to some places. I was in Orcas Islands last year, which was particularly nice. And then things like today, so I live in Glasgow, so a reasonably long day, but nothing out of the ordinary for me. during surveys, you will be doing long and erratic working hours, and in fact, all of our staff have to sign away the working hours directive, so that's something you need to be aware of. 20-odd hour shifts whilst you're working on a survey offshore is really not uncommon. It costs an awful lot of money to get those ships out to sea. So you need to be making most of that time whilst you're out there. Tight deadlines as well, and I think that's probably common to all disciplines, but I think it's particularly true of consulting. Certainly in terms of preparing tenders for work, it's very unusual that I get more than a week. And I won't know about it in advance, so you can't plan for it. So that does mean that you end up working overtime inevitably, weekend and evening. And repetitive tasks, which we've touched on already. So those are some of the negative points. It is still a really good fun career, but I do think you have to have a passion for it, otherwise you really this, I don't think. Generally, people that don't have a true passion don't last more than about a year, is my experience. So in terms of beneficial skills, again, some of it's a bit alright. Repeating what a lot of people have said this morning, enthusiasm is by far and away the most important thing, and analytical skills as well, the basics. But in terms of technical skills that are useful at the moment, GIS, in terms of marine consulting, really won't get very far without GIS skills, they're completely invaluable. And taxonomy, that's also another one that's really useful. Statistics is something that's generally not taught that well in university, so that's also something that's worth maybe putting a bit of extra effort into. So within our sector, in terms of the career development opportunities, as you go along, there's always going to be loads of opportunities to develop those skills. It's always great to go for those opportunities when you're given them. So technical skills you will have to build up as you go through your career, things like fieldwork, taxonomy, statistics, and then you'll also build up a whole load of transferable skills, writing, IT, presenting skills. I think absolutely agree that presenting and communicating science is becoming more and more important, and certainly in consultancy you need to be able to communicate often quite complex science to developers, to policy advisors, so that's really important. Management skills, there's certainly loads of opportunities if you're interested or you find you enjoy managing teams of people. We have lab managers, fieldwork supervisors, office managers, or you could be a bit mad and decide to be a director. But there's also plenty of opportunities to progress scientifically as well, and often you'll do most of these together. So within consultancies, you usually have a principal or a senior ecologist, and they've usually got 15 or 20 years experience. You'll have senior specialists. You can join IAT and become a chartered scientist. There's also opportunities to continue your academic studies. So I'm doing a part-time PhD. A lot of my colleagues have done MSc studies whilst they've been working. And if you're worried about your finances, that's another option that's open to you. So in terms of improving your employment chances then, postgraduate training is not essential. You will generally, certainly within my company, we have a salary grading system, so you will come in at a slightly higher salary if you have an MSc or a PhD. But you have to be a bit careful about what topic you select. So if you've done something really, really specific that isn't widely applicable to what's going on in the UK, you may struggle a bit. That may be a slight disadvantage in terms of work. And you also need to be aware that certainly with MSCs, that's only a 1 or 2 years of additional training. What we find is we often get people that have done MSc in environmental impact assessments, and they come in expecting to write full environmental impact assessment themselves. Generally, those people have certainly 10 to 20 years experience, so just be aware of where that's sitting you. If you're expecting that to be a shortcut to the top, it won't necessarily be that for you. Volunteering, any kind of additional work experience and work placements are helpful on your CVs. When I graduated, I think there were about 40 people coming out of Killer, and now there's 140 people, so there is a lot of competition for jobs. So anything you can do to just get over the cost of people that you really are passionate about the subject, I think really helps. And certainly I was told that having that voluntary experience on my CV was one of the things that got me an targeted training courses. If you have a bit of a gap between graduating and finding a job, use that time. There's loads of short courses out there in the field work techniques or taxonomy, those kinds of technical skills that you might have touched on at university, but you're going to need to develop in a big way once you start working. So those are all things that you can be doing to improve your chances of working. And that.